Oh, baby. Unit 2. Now we're looking into specific things that have definitely influenced the founders' thinking on government. The big capstone for this unit is essentially hey, um, government can do better. And it's good to roll into unit 2, still thinking about what we had in unit 1, which is what is the philosophy of good government. So those thoughts and ideas, they get brought down into reality. And the big takeaway from unit 1 is you had these people that thought about government, and then people that moved over to the colonies, they wanted government to reflect their life. They wanted government to take a step back, to have government protect their life, their liberty, and their property, their natural rights. So the buildup here for Unit 2 is into the Declaration of Independence, or as I like to call it, the best breakup letter in history. So, what we have to do there is think about what the Declaration of Independence actually is. It is a breakup letter. The colonists will eventually split up with England. And if you think about it, that's pretty substantial. A letter written by humans that, when written, you have a good idea about what government should do. And there's a history of letters that have been written in history that shape how government works. And the first letter that we're going to look at is this thing called the Magna Carta. Um, and the lesson question for the first lesson in Unit 2 is, how did constitutional government develop in Great Britain? Um, and again, a constitution from Unit 1 is just a list of what government can do. So the Constitution is also a letter. Um, there's a lot of writing when it comes to government, and that's why I have you write a lot. So let's just get into it. I'm going to share my screen. And once you see my screen, you should see that the lesson question for lesson 6 in unit 2 is, how did constitutional government develop in Great Britain? So let's just get to it. Uh, Here we go. Constitutional government developed in Great Britain over a period of many centuries. In this lesson, you will learn how the monarchy came to share power with the nobles, not normal people, but nobles. You will study some documents that limited the power of the British government. So again, from Unit 1, limits Constitution. This study will help you to better understand our ideas about limited government. So essentially, where did constitutional government come from? When you finish this lesson, you should be able to describe the struggles for power between the English monarch and Parliament. You should be able to explain how these struggles led to a system of separated powers and representative government. So again, that's a callback to Unit 1. You should also be able to describe some of the important constitutional documents in British history that influenced the writing of our Constitution. So again, from Unit 1, one of the big outcomes of people thinking about government is this idea of constitutional government, which inherently does two things. One, it limits the power of government, and it also creates a private life for the citizens. So, terms to understand here, there's a few: common law, English Bill of Rights, feudalism, Magna Carta. Magna Carta. I had an English teacher who talked like that when I was in middle school. I won't say her name, but she's a legend. Parliament, petition of rights of Englishmen, and rule of law. Let's get to it. And yes, it is a bit wonky, but that's okay. Why did the American colonists have the rights of Englishmen? So again, when you're taking your notes, if you need like help in what to write, That big fat question there. We love those big fat questions. The rights of Englishmen were established during centuries of British history. These were certain basic rights that all subjects of the English king or queen were believed to have. They included the right to a trial by jury, security from unlawful entry into one's home, and no taxation without consent, or no taxation without giving your permission. Hmm. I wonder if that'll come up again. Oh, baby. Here we go. Before the American colonies became independent, the colonists were subjects of the British monarchy. As subjects of the king or queen, the colonists enjoyed the rights of Englishmen. All subjects of the king or queen had these rights. The colonists knew and understood their rights as Englishmen. The colonists' experiences with British government greatly influenced what they thought about limited government. For our study, it is important to understand these rights and how they developed over time. It is also important to remember that the Constitution of Great Britain is not a single written document. Instead, it is made up of long established practices known as common law and laws passed by Parliament. Common law is based on custom and the decisions of law courts. Parliament is the legislative body of British government. So when people talk about Congress, oh, Congress should do that, Congress should do this. Well, in England, they call that Parliament. And once we get into what Parliament actually looks like, you'll see how it is influenced on how Parliament has influenced our Congress. Because there's two bodies in Parliament, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. But we'll get to that. And again, this is kind of where we're going here. And I like this cartoon because it shows royalty over here and nobility over here. And then you've got common people over here in that order. And the history of constitutional government starts with royalty, and then the power shifts a little bit towards the nobles. And then, as you will find out, there is more power that is going to be given to the common people, but that won't happen for a long time. Because here we go. Until 1066. Yikes. 1066. So, like 700 years prior to the beginning of our country. See? People in the United States think the world history starts with, 1776. Oh no, it doesn't. Until 1066, each region of England had its own ruler. William the Conqueror from France invaded England in that year and became king of all the regions. William the Conqueror brought a system for governing called feudalism. Oh, look at this. Feudalism was a system of social, economic, and political organization. The system was based on the control of land. Under feudalism, the people in England belonged to one of three social groups. And again, let's just apply the PEX filter. Or one, royalty. This was the king and queen and their families. Government by a king or a queen is a monarchy. Nobility. This group included the lords and ladies who held titles such as Earl, Duke, Duchess, and Baron. The noblemen worked for the monarchy and made it possible for the king or queen to control England. And then number three, the common people. These were the rest of the people. This group included the knights or soldiers of the king, merchants, and peasants. The peasants were also known as serfs. They farmed the land and were not free to leave the area in which they worked. So again, their freedom was kind of restricted. So right away, you should be thinking, do I want to be a serf the rest of my life? Would you want to be told that you have to stay exactly where you're supposed to be? Me neither. All public land in England belonged to the monarch, but it was too much land for one person to rule. So the monarch gave some responsibility for governing the kingdom to the nobility. Under the feudal system, the nobles controlled parts of the land as well as the people who lived there. In exchange, the nobles pledged to be loyal to the king and to go to war for him. The nobles further divided the land into smaller areas. A nobleman assigned control of the land and people living in it to men called vassals. The vassals, in turn, owed the nobleman loyalty and military service. For the system to work, it depended on a series of agreements or contracts. Social contracts. There had to be contracts between the monarch and the nobles. There also had to be contracts between the nobles and the vassals. Each contract included rights and responsibilities that the parties owed to one another. Thus, feudalism introduced the idea of government based on a contract. Those in power pledged to respect the rights of the people who gave them loyalty. The feudal system was important to the development of constitutional government. It was during this period that the monarchs started to share power with the nobles. Yeah, it's time to get ready and stretch for this big question here. Why is the Magna Carta an important document? Here we go. Under the feudal system, it became a custom or tradition for the royalty to share some of its power with the nobility. As a result, the nobles became used to having certain rights and powers. When King John tried to take back some of these rights, the nobles rebelled. The nobles were powerful enough to force King John to sign an agreement with them in the year 1215. This agreement is the Magna Carta, or Great Charter. The Magna Carta was a major step in the growth of English constitutional government. The Magna Carta was perhaps the most important early example of a written statement of law limiting the power of a ruler. The Magna Carta contains two important ideas that influence the founders. One, government is based on a contract between the ruler and the people to be ruled. Government by contract also includes the idea that if either side breaks the contract, that contract is no longer valid. Number two, both government and the governed must obey the law. This is called the rule of law. The law limits the powers of government. The king could not take away the property of a noble without following agreed upon procedures and rules. The Magna Carta expresses the idea of limited government by requiring the king to govern according to established rules of law. And on the module for Unit 2, you should see a couple of articles about the Magna Carta there. And again, this part here is just little bits and pieces from the Magna Carta, and we will skip that for this video. But they are fun to think about. And what you should see is how some of these ideas from the Magna Carta are going to show up in our Constitution. So here we go. More about the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was a contract between the king and the nobility. Most of the people in England were not a part of this agreement, but the Magna Carta is an early step leading to the idea that government should be based on a contract that includes all the people. Government by contract means that both sides of the agreement are responsible for fulfilling its terms. The Magna Carta states that the king cannot deprive the nobility of their rights. The nobility, in return, must support and obey the king and the laws. All right, so now that we've got the Magna Carta, next we're going to find out about the creation of Parliament. So the Magna Carta then shifts power from the king to the nobles. And now we're going to see how the nobles begin to take a little bit more power away from the king. And that's kind of like, I'll probably in class draw a picture of like the three groups of people that are mentioned in this lesson so far. The power then is going to go from the king to the nobles, and then from the nobles to the common people. And arguably, there's still a power struggle between the people that have power and normal people, but that's another discussion for another day. Why was the creation of Parliament important? Important changes in the English government caused the establishment of other basic principles of government. These principles are the separation of powers and representative government. Again, a callback to Unit 1. It's great. In 1258, the nobles forced the king to create an advisory council. This council was called Parliament. Parliament is the legislative branch of the English government. It was made up of two houses that represented the most powerful groups in the kingdom, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. The House of Lords represented the nobles. The House of Commons represented the people who owned large amounts of land but were not nobles. Gradually, during the next centuries, the role of Parliament grew. Its members were no longer simply advising the monarch, they were representing the interests of their regions. For hundreds of years after the creation of Parliament, the royalty, nobility, and commons had struggled for power. No one group was able to be completely in control for long. Then, in 1628, so again, just historical perspective here, this is in 1628, and the Magna Carta was created or written in 1215. So this shift in power takes a couple hundred years. It's not quick. So just think about that. Like there's these big shifts in history and then things settle down. Then in 1628, the king tried to pressure the people for money without the consent of parliament. He also required the people to house soldiers in their homes. As a result, parliament forced him to agree to the Petition of Right of 1628. The petition stated that the king could only raise taxes with the consent of parliament. Whoa, we're talking about taxes. It also no longer allowed the king to house soldiers in the homes of the people. The Petition of Right strengthened the idea that English subjects had certain rights that government could not violate. The struggle between the monarch and parliament became so intense during the 17th century that a series of civil wars broke out, and that's where Tommy Hobbes came from. The nobles finally won, and in 1649, Parliament ordered the execution of the king. Whoa! By 1688, the balance of power had shifted in favor of Parliament. Whoa! Whoa. They're killing kings. Yikes. So, what was the English Bill of Rights? In 1689, Parliament passed the English Bill of Rights. This law gave certain rights to Parliament that further limited the powers of the monarch. It said, among other things, that elections to Parliament must be free and that the people have the right to petition the king. It also said that the monarchy was no longer allowed to do the following: collect taxes without the consent of Parliament, interfere with the right to free speech and debate in Parliament, maintain an army in peacetime, prevent Protestants from having arms for their defense. What? Require excessive bail or administer cruel punishment for those accused of convicted of crime or convicted of crimes. And again, these are things that the monarchy was no longer allowed to do. Or finally, declare that laws made by Parliament should not be obeyed. By the end of the 1600s, the British government was much more limited in what it could do. This was at the same time that the British were establishing colonies in North America. So the colonies brought these ideas about good government with them to the New World. Yikes. Well, that's the end of lesson 6. What? Yeah, there's a lot of extra reading that I would advise people to do. I'm going to find something about the English Bill of Rights so you can get a little bit more details on that. The history of English Parliament's good to have, and definitely Magna Carta. And again, this shift in power from one person to a small group of people that have power because they have land, and then they control that land and tell people what to do with that land on like with the common people, the commons. And then, yeah, even now, there's still a common struggle between people that, for some reason, they don't feel like they have a lot of power. Um, And that's just not the case, not in our system of government, because we are in control. So, with the start of lesson six, there is a lot of callbacks to lesson one, the idea of representative government representing the ideas of the people, and then government essentially only limiting itself to what it can and can't do. And the things that it can't do, that's taken care of by uh, the citizens, or in this case, if it's England, they're subjects. But in our country, we don't have subjects, we have active citizens. So that idea of having citizens, normal people just like you, in control of what government does or what it should do, uh, that shift didn't happen overnight. It took a long time. So hopefully you learned a little bit of history there, and your note's done. See ya.